All right, good afternoon. I am Chris Campbell, and this is B-Sides Las Vegas, and Shot with Your Own Gun, how appliances are used against you. This is my first con presentation. Skip Duckwall is my mentor, so he made me go over these slides a million times. We're both pen testers with Northrop Grumman. I do not speak for anyone but myself. I do not speak for my company. And all of this research was done at home, not during work hours. So why am I giving this talk? Some people will probably argue with that first point, but what we're seeing, I've been a pen tester about 4 years. Enterprises are starting to get better. We're seeing a lot more system administrators coming out to conferences like this. And then we hear a lot of conversations between CISOs and managers basically measuring their security department based on what appliances they actually own. So we're going to talk about how those appliances can actually be the reason that the bad guys get in. What this talk is not, because I've been to a lot of conferences but never talked before, one of my pet peeves is when someone gets up and just craps on vendors. I don't intend to do that. I probably won't bring up a vendor unless I have to, so mostly the talk is going to be generalized. Any of the stuff that I found or did, I'm pretty sure most of the people in this room could have done. So I'm just going to try to point you in the direction and see if you can go back to wherever you work and find some of these same vulnerabilities. So that's what we're going to talk about. It's going to be very brief what the actual things that you can do to secure your network are with the vulnerabilities in these appliances, mostly because you put your money up front. Once you buy it, it's yours. There's not much you can do with it. We didn't actually test any of the appliances for what they're supposed to do. So like if it's a proxy, I didn't test to see if it's actually proxying. I just looked at vulnerabilities in the appliance itself. Used the word appliance probably 50 times already, but we're not talking about killer toasters. We're talking about network appliances, stuff that's actually sitting on your network, doing some sort of task, normally rack mounted, but a lot of companies are selling them as virtual machines now. So they generally have one purpose, either a firewall, some sort of IDS, security appliance, network monitoring appliance, or policy. So some of the appliances may seem obscure when I bring the list. So I just wanted to point out that there are a lot of organizations that are using these appliances. So these are from the vendors' websites, the actual organizations that, and I just picked ones from different areas. So you've got schools, government, and big corporations. So what are the vendors claiming? So I'll leave this up for a minute so you can read it. I had maybe 20 or 30 great examples of the kind of stuff that these vendors are claiming. But anytime you say that your product blocks both known and unknown attacks with 100% accuracy, you're probably destined for failure. Not to mention when your product also has its own vulnerabilities. So it may do that. Again, we didn't test what it actually does. It may protect other things, but it doesn't protect itself. The bottom one is probably the biggest problem, is the marketing behind these products say that it's plug in and forget. You power the thing on, it's ready to go, and it doesn't require any kind of manual intervention. So when you take people out of the equation, sometimes it's good, but sometimes it's really bad. So these are the types of appliances. The one under remote access, MRV, kind of started this all. When I got started, one particular customer had those appliances, that type of appliance deployed at every location. We figured out that there was a backdoor account in it, so we were constantly getting in to this one Linux-based appliance, but we didn't know what we could do with it. So I bought one on eBay a couple years ago, and I spent a lot of time building a kit against that specific thing so that we could use it in future assessments. And the rest of them have pretty much been, after that, the Google search appliance. That's the thing that started me buying a lot of them on eBay was ShmooCon. A couple months ago, Rob Fuller gave a talk that was based on a tool that he put out over the top of a Google search appliance. So I kind of had tech envy. He had a Google search appliance, so I wanted one. So I bought one, and then I bought a lot more stuff. All right, so I guess this talk could be titled How to Spend a Couple $1,000 and Give a B-Sides talk. But where did the appliances actually come from? A variety of different places. Most of them came from eBay, but I did find some interesting stuff on Craigslist every once in a while. I live in the Metro DC area, so the stuff that I bought on Craigslist was the most interesting. We'll talk about that in a minute. Another cool thing is you can get fully functional demos from the actual company. So if you wanted to go to McAfee, you could download their email and web security virtual appliance, the entire VM, and have a fully functioning virtual machine to look at before you actually purchase it. And if you've never seen the virtual appliance marketplace, if you're a pen tester, it's like a great practice ground. You can go out there and just download all these virtual machines, just fire them up, and go to town. So how expensive are the appliances? They're really not that bad. I tried to stick to under $150. Occasionally I had to go above it. The MRV is the bottom one. You see, buy it now for $79. If you've not seen this best offer on eBay, it's awesome. So I lowballed on a ton of stuff, just $50, $100 less than, and occasionally they sold it to me. I told them what I was doing. Hey, I'm doing research. I'm going to look for vulnerabilities in this product. And most of the time they just said, I don't care, and sold it to me. All right, that picture doesn't come out real well on the screen, but it started pretty easy. I have a little rack that was pretty much empty when I started, and then that got full. And I don't live alone, so someone got very upset with me when appliances started getting stacked all over the house. So I started hiding them underneath the couch when she told me I couldn't buy anymore. All right, so how did I test them? I started by actually imaging the hard drives because most of them came configured already, and I wanted a backup in case I broke anything. I also read the documentation. A lot of times I read the documentation before I bought it. When you read the manual, you'll be surprised at the number of vulnerabilities that you can pick out, or the potential vulnerabilities just reading the manual. So in some cases I had to restore them back to factory settings because they were overly configured. And then I placed them on just a standalone network. And I went through a pretty standard pen tests, nothing fancy. I used a lot of Nmap and NSE scripts. I used Metasploit. And I would log in with default credentials and look for ways to actually get at the host OS. I want to root on the host OS remotely. So kind of up front, why do these vulnerabilities that we're going to talk about, why do they exist? Command injection, for the most part, I found lots of command injection vulnerabilities on many of the appliances. But when I reported them to the vendors, they said it's lateral privilege. You had to log in through the web interface as admin. So you should be able to do admin type functions in their opinion. So they dismissed it as not a vulnerability. And I'll show you one of those examples. Vendors just classify them as features, and I'll show you a demo of one of those features. But the bottom line is if a hacker gains access to the admin interface of an appliance, they're pretty much going to be able to get to the underlying OS. So the big stumbling block when I was pitching this talk to some people was, well, how do you get the password? And I guess when you do this for long enough, you just don't even acknowledge things like that. You can get the passwords pretty easily. At the bottom is one specific. I'll actually show you in the demo the problem with that appliance. But they limit the length of the password and complexity to the point where it's almost impossible to pick a password that isn't in every dictionary out there. Default passwords and backdoor accounts are actually very common as well. And then building a custom dictionary for just appliances has been effective for the last couple years. All right, so what did I actually find? So the gray market stuff, you guys all know, used IT equipment is going to have stuff on it, whether they try to wipe it or not. And in no case did any of the appliances that I bought on eBay, no one made any effort to wipe any of the data off of them. So I found passwords, enterprise passwords, admin passwords, infrastructure, basically their internal IP schemes. On some of the The proxies, you can see where HR requested a report of a certain employee's browsing habits, and all of that stuff is still on there. And surprisingly, even the demos that are available on the vendors' websites, even they had things that probably shouldn't be on a brand new, fresh appliance. So on the left is just proxy logs. These are just some examples. Basically, it's a financial institution of some sort that deals with mortgages. So they're requesting access to different mortgage calculators. And on the right, some scan results. So you got Solaris 8, 9, probably not good. All right, so more scan results. And from what I could tell, on your left there, you can see at the bottom, DCOM. So they've got boxes that have the DCOM vulnerability on their internal network. And this appliance was pulled out of production and sold on eBay. It seems like it was maybe off of their network 3 months. So if they haven't patched since 2003, they probably haven't patched that. On the right, you can see that they're pushing almost 1,500 vulnerabilities per site, that same organization. And the top is some logs, just internal IPs. The passwords, kind of how I was able to extract the passwords besides getting into the database on the back end of a lot of the appliances. This is something we see a lot. They don't store the passwords very securely. So when you put in your enterprise password for it to interact through LDAP, all it takes is to right-click and view the source of the page with the little dots. And at the top, up there, you'll see that line. That's their actual domain / the username. And underneath is their actual password. And this came from an appliance that was probably in production not too long ago. All right, so here's an example of what was on a virtual machine. So this is a clean appliance that I downloaded. And it shows kind of how the vendor thinks, how they set the root password. A lot of them set a static root password and give it to you, which is excellent, so you can change it. In this case, they don't give you the password. They use this activation script. So you download it and activate the product. It pulls out your serial number and then adds them. If everyone could see, it's setting the root password. What that actually means is they're taking the 10 digits in the serial number, adding them all together, so that gives you 91 possible combinations, 0 through 90. And it's pretty easy to generate all of those passwords. So not having the root password in this case did not matter, even though I specifically asked the vendor, can I have it? And they said no. But that'll pretty much, they're struggling to fix that, so I won't say who it is. All right, so why would a company put their appliance out on eBay without wiping it? Well, can everyone tell what that is? It's a rivet. It's not a screw. So they've actually riveted the case so that you can't take the hard drive out. So in this case, what I can tell from the story, and this is one of the Craigslist ones, he was an IT guy. Google gives you a new appliance when your service runs out. So they just said, yeah, take it home. He was like, I'll wipe it and put it on eBay. Well, once he saw it was riveted, he was like, well, I'm not going to drill in it. So he put it on Craigslist. I actually talked to him a little bit about why he didn't, after I had it in my hands, why didn't you take the hard drive out? And he told me. He didn't want to drill in. And then he told me, well, I tried to boot into an alternate OS, which is pretty smart, but it's got a BIOS password on it. So what the vendor is basically saying is, we don't want you to remove the data, or we value our product, our code more than your data. So what if I couldn't get in? I would disassemble the appliances, image the hard drives. Like I said, that's one of the first steps. You could actually take the virtual machine hard drives and mount them pretty simply. I dumped all the hashes and cracked. I think I only cracked about 40% of the default ones that weren't provided. And then I looked through all the source code. And there was one particular vendor, I'm not going to say who it is, but props to the vendor that's actually encrypting their virtual hard drives in a way that is not easy. So about those rivets. A drill made pretty short work of them so that we can get inside. But how would an attacker get in? Because obviously they're not going to walk in with a drill, walk into your server room, yank out your appliance, and maybe they will. I don't think that's realistic. They're more than likely going to get in through the web interface because that's what's going to be listening. There's a difference between web interfaces, I guess, and admin interfaces. A lot of them are listening on multiple HTTP ports, and they're more than likely going to try default passwords. If you're a pen tester, you know default passwords will get you into something in nearly every enterprise. So we'll talk about some things you can find and move from that point. Backdoor accounts, in one of the demos, I'll show you what that looks like. And log aggregation on a lot of these things is broken, so they don't really feed into your enterprise well. So brute force against an appliance is not going to show up in your Windows logs. So a lot of times, it's just sitting off to the side, and it can be hit. There's other problems. They might ship with their own vulnerable, like FTP. The technical support procedures might allow for password resets. Exposed database ports are bad, especially when they don't give you what the SA or admin password on the back end is. And then I don't know many people know about this, but like DRAC and the HP ILO, there's a lot of really interesting things you can do with the default passwords if those are left on. And stuff like the Google search appliance, the big yellow one, ships with a DRAC card in it because it's a Dell 1950. All right, so how do you get default passwords? There's tons of websites. You can go to the vendor's website and pull down the actual manual, or you can just click something like, in this case, first time user, and it'll tell you. And a lot of them do that. All right, so baked in vulnerabilities. On the left, you'll see a Metasploit module going against a vulnerable FTP service that came with this appliance. It did come with that vulnerable service, but it also came with this really sweet physical security feature, I guess. You can fight off ninjas with the device. So the support procedures. Almost all the appliances had SSH open. A lot of them had extra SSH ports. So you would hit it on a standard SSH port, and it would be standard SSH. You'd hit it on another port, and it would have another account, in this case admin, which gave you this Cisco-like type menu, which on the back end, it was just a Perl script that was emulating that kind of menu. But one of the things the Perl script was running as root, and one of the things the Perl script could do, in this case, was actually set the password of the root accounts on the appliance itself. So even though this vendor did not provide the root password, you could reset it going through this other interface. So you're going to want to scan, if you get a new appliance, scan it on all ports, because some of them are listening on really crazy ports. I don't think it's a good idea to have an appliance running on Microsoft Windows, but a lot of companies, I guess, do. So a couple of them actually were running on Windows. So they would have, instead of SSH, RDP open and listening on 445, so you could pass the hash. Or in this case, you'll see that the company, this is a used one, the company actually set a decent administrator password because it's not stored in LM, it's only stored in NT, so it's 15 characters or more. But the support account, which is also an administrator, is stored in LM because it's so short. So you could easily crack the LM hashes with rainbow tables and then just RDP into the appliance itself. All right, so here's another Windows one. I'm actually on the box in the screenshot, but you could do it remotely as well. MS SQL 1433 was listening, so you could just connect, and then XP command shell was enabled. So you could run system commands through the database port. When they set the password to a really easy dictionary word, the user-defined functions within MySQL can be handy, and you can take root access through those database ports as well. All right, So the DRAC. All right, Dell Remote Access Console. Again, ships with a couple appliances, one in particular, Google Search Appliance. If you go to Media and down to CD, DVD, you can actually mount a virtual ISO. So you can mount and boot to, you can pass the console through the web interface. You can boot, I wouldn't recommend Backtrack, but you could boot any small Linux distro and get physical access to the underlying OS, the hard drive, pull the hashes down, pull whatever data off it, and then reboot it. Obviously, it's going to be loud and it's going to take the appliance down, but it's more than likely not being monitored anyway. So we've had success with this particular attack. The default username and password is root Calvin on those. Okay, so HD was just talking about this. The F5 appliance was one that I looked at. This was a public disclosure by someone else, and there's a Metasploit module available for it. But I'll show you how easy it would have been to discover this particular vulnerability, and I'll let you know hopefully in the next few weeks, disclosure will come out on another couple products that have done the same thing. So the main problem with this is the appliance ships with the private key available. So you can actually buy one. There was one for $9.99. Buy it now and pull that off, or you can do what we did, which was just download it. To this day, you can download it from F5 right now, and it still has the private key on there. And then you can SSH in as root. Did anybody go to HD's talk? How many F5 appliances were on the internet? 2.1 million. All right. All right. So we're going to use grub and set the init to bin sh so that we can boot into single user mode. And then we're going to search around and just look for this particular private key. Because they didn't put it where private keys would typically be, they're not in the root directory or sitting in .ssh or anywhere like that. We're going to start with going to .ssh and look at the authorized keys, because that's how we know that that private key is allowed to log in. So now we know enough about that. So Skip's logic was, well, hey, we can figure out what directory that key sits in, and it's probably sitting in the same directory. So to easily find it, just use find. And give it a second. There we go. ID underscore RSA.pub is probably sitting with the private key. So does anyone have any questions so far? Nope. Cool. All right, so there's the key that matches. So now we'll do an ls on that directory. All right, now let's see what we can do with the key. So how would this actually work? So we have the key because it's been disclosed. So you're doing a pen test. So you're typically going to do an nmap scan to go ahead and look. In this case, I know what IP it's sitting on, so just scan it. There it is. It says big IP in the title. Got a little fancy with this demo. All right, so we have the SSH key, and again, like I said, there's a Metasploit module that automates this, but it really is as simple as copying the actual key to a directory on the box. There's the key that we found. So I'm just going to move the key to the temp directory, and then we need to set the permissions on the key because SSH will freak out if you don't. And then we're going to SSH using the key into the F5 appliance or one of any of the 2.1 million sitting on the internet listening. Yep.
So it really is that easy. So just to prove that we're root, we'll cat something like Etsy Shadow. Yeah, so basically going back to the root password that's predictable, it basically works the same way. You could just try each one of those going across the internet, and you could find, I don't know how widely deployed that particular appliance is, but the vendor is very upset about that. All right, so we already talked about who exposes this stuff. You can get on Shodan HQ. I think HD was demoing another product that does the same thing, and you can find these exact appliances all over the internet. So do you think the organizations even know? Does anyone in here have appliances sitting on the internet? I mean, a lot of times until a pen tester or someone actually gets in, they don't even know that it's sitting there. One of those is one that comes with a backdoor account you can't get rid of. So I'm pretty confident that if I were a bad guy, I could log in. So let's talk about features. And this is what gets a lot of people. Even if we can't get root on the underlying OS, these appliances come with really cool things that we can actually use against the organization. We saw port scan results before. So we can scan, we can do anything an attacker would want to do. We can do packet captures and pull down the actual authentication. They come with shell utilities, so like through the GUI, you can, through the web interface, you click a button and it pops up Java, and then you have root on the actual underlying OS. So my question is, are these features even necessary? So if you get something that has features that you don't want, like if you've got something that has nothing to do with scanning, why would it have a network scanner built in? In this case, you can capture PCAPs and pull them down and analyze them. So in multiple cases, we were able to gain credentials just by running this and pulling down the PCAPs and pulling out what was inside. Here on this appliance, you can just enable SSH and log in. So that brings up another point. What's it using on the back end to actually do those port scans? Of course, it's using Nmap. So when you get to the underlying OS, Nmap's going to be there. And so is TCP dump. And so is Netcat. So is anything else that you would actually want to attack their box. So basically, by purchasing these appliances and putting them out there, they're giving you a pen test workstation for you to work from. Especially if they're a Windows organization, you can get onto a Linux box through these appliances and do any of the stuff that you would want to do, including set up a outbound SSH and tunnel. So how would an attacker actually get root from the web interface? We talked about the command execution features. I'm going to demo one in a moment. Other command injection vulnerabilities, which I think are on the next slide. We've already talked about the SSH and telnet. SQL injection, a lot of them did not have obvious SQL injection. A lot of them were hiding behind this. Does anyone know what that probably is? If you just look at it. It came up instantly. I put a single tick in and bam, that popped up. It's client side. So it's only, for the most part, they're faking the funk with client side filtering. Pretty easy to pop burp open and get around that stuff. So if you go on ExploitDB, you'll find thousands or hundreds of vulnerabilities against these appliances. I think the biggest problem, the reason that there are not more of them, is because there's so few. Some of these vendors are only selling 100 or 200 of these custom-built appliances. So people like us aren't getting their hands on it. So that's kind of what I wanted to point out. The big name people are getting hit, so Barracuda and Symantec and McAfee, they get hit because they're commonly deployed. The other ones aren't, so they're full of vulnerabilities. So if you're dealing with a small vendor, you're definitely going to want to take a look at this. Most of the command injection that I found stemmed from setting the IP address on the appliance. It seemed like all of them are struggling with how to do this because ifconfig typically requires root privilege, so they allow this, even though some other places they don't, they allow this to run as root. So you're not going to get anything returned back here. So a good way to find out if this is working is to ping yourself. So just adding a semicolon and ping in the middle of that built ifconfig, I was able to confirm that command injection was possible. You could do something silly like add a user just so you can SSH in. Say you have the root password. Better yet, you could use wget to pull down a payload and execute it as root. All right, so let's see what that looks like in one of my favorite appliances / applications. All right, there's going to be a lot of stuff. I'm going to pause this. I'm a PowerShell freak, and I contribute to the PowerSploit, Matt Graber's PowerSploit project. So I use a lot of PowerShell in here, so I'm going to explain it pretty quickly. It's kind of confusing, but hopefully I'll do a decent job. So we're scanning. This is sped up, obviously, by the spastic blinking. We're scanning 10.10.32.3, which will take a few seconds. And then we're going to discover that it has a web interface. So there it is. So we're going to go to the web interface, and it's the one from the slides before. It says the username is admin, so let's try that. And in this case, they've actually changed it, which is pretty common, but that's good. All right, so we're going to see what's different in valid username, and I'm going to use a Firefox plugin called Fireforce, which is really cool and easy way to do brute force attacks against the web interface. So we're going to type in the invalid username and password so it knows what's invalid. And then you're going to see me be retarded because I set that admin password to something I did not think was in and speed up. And I couldn't even come up with a password that wasn't in my own dictionary. So that's a fail on my behalf. But you can't set anything but numbers and letters and up to 8 characters on this particular. So it also came with these really fun baked in backdoor accounts. So when you updated, it added 3 admin accounts to your appliance or server if you're running this on a Windows box. So I actually spent hours the first time I got into one of these on a pen test going through each and every one of these things to figure out what I could use to exploit it. In the notification profiles, you could run a program, or more interestingly, you can run a system command, which is a lot easier. In this case, I'm trying to demo a little bit of the PowerSploit stuff. So we're going to do a simple program, run as admin, not system, and then show you how to get to system on a 64-bit Windows box, which I've had, Matt and I have had a lot of questions from pen testers who are trying to use it. So this is Matt's inject shellcode, which is just a PowerShell script. It's actually just a function. So if you go to the actual site and you download it, it's just a function. So you have to call the function. So what we're going to do, since this is a 64-bit box and this payload doesn't work against 64-bit processes, it can't inject into them, we're going to start our own x86 process. We're going to start notepad hidden, and then we're just going to get that process ID and pass it as a parameter to inject shellcode. And the stub is already built in for reverse HTTPS. You don't have to go deal with shellcode or any of that stuff if you just want to use that. So it's awesome, easy way to bypass AV and application whitelisting. All right. So get encoded command is a script that I wrote that I will release soon that's based on Dave Kennedy's create command that he released at DEF CON a couple years ago. And I just added the call x86 parameter so that it'll call the x86 version of PowerShell instead of the 64-bit one. It encodes the entire command because we're trying to get around the execution policy. By default, PowerShell will not let you run .ps1 files. So just in case they haven't relaxed that, we're going to encode the entire command and pass it at the command line by line, and you'll see that it actually works. So we're just going to take that entire encoded command, drop it in as an argument, just because this is easier. And then we're going to define the full path to the actual PowerShell that's sitting in sysfile64, which is the x86 version of it. So I overcomplicated this demo because I knew I was going to record it. Can't really make out, but that's where the PowerShell execute the actual binary is sitting. So we're going to paste that there. And then we're going to change the profile name because it won't run without a profile name. And then instead of saving, because that would actually write to something, we're just going to hit test. So that's going to take a minute for it to pull down the stub, and eventually it'll come back and say that the command completed successfully, or freeze. But on the other end, we have our handler set up, and we've opened a session. Obviously, I practiced a couple times. But so we're going to interact with the session. It appears to be cut off a little bit, but we're going to get system, which is simple, and then a trick if you're a pen tester, migrate. If you're in an x86 process on a 64-bit machine, migrate into a system-owned 64-bit process so that you get around all the token controls that are in Server 2008. So we'll migrate into one of those. I think I've migrated into conhost. And then we'll be able to do hash dump and all the other things. So we've got complete control of this box through the interface, thanks to a backdoor account that they added with an update. So if you configure the appliance and just allowed the automatic updates, they pretty much helped you out there. All right, so we can go to a shell. You saw we were able to do hash dump. Go ahead and crack my password. So hopefully this is apparent, but why should you care? All the stuff on your appliance, obviously anything that's on there, all the data can be had. It's sitting in a database. So by actually getting on the appliance, you can get into it and get that data. The other interesting thing is if you're a pretty secure organization and you're actually monitoring outbound connections and you're on it, this can be a place that you're not really looking, because a lot of these appliances are set up to call to the vendors. And unless you have those IP addresses, it just looks like standard updating. So if they're able to get on the appliance, or say have bought the appliance on eBay and became familiar with how the appliance actually talks, you can basically walk that dog. We've been able to sit on appliances in pretty secure organizations because they thought it was just standard update traffic. And who would monitor something that's protecting all of everything all the time anyway? Right. Another thing is sometimes it's sitting in a privileged network location. So it's sitting in some sort of admin VLAN, or it's multi-homed, and that TCP dump interface that it has is able to grab other traffic. And then you can turn it around. So if you're a pen tester and you want a fun way to show this vulnerability, default passwords are bad, turn around and start attacking the actual admins that are logging into the appliance. So you can move from that into the enterprise pretty easily. So malicious iframes is a fun one. And I'll show you what that looks like. And you can grab domain authentication through those packet captures. All right, so this is a proxy, but a lot of time it comes down to the branding. Whatever the branding feature is, see if you can call external HTML. If you can call an external image tag with the branding feature, you can basically hook everybody that goes to every page. So in this case, the top one is the authentication page. So you've got full control of the HTML through the web interface. You can drop an iframe there and hook the admin as soon as they go to log in, hook their browser. Typically we use Beef for that. Or more fun, the access denied. Every time someone goes to a bad website, you hook their browser. I had a admin very recently get really upset. He was a really smart guy on it. Got onto a box, and we were able to actually man in the middle from the appliance. But we got all of his credentials because the certificates on these things either expire, they're not trusted, they're generally self-signed. So he couldn't tell the difference when he was logging into the appliance. We were man in the middle from a different appliance. We were getting all of his credentials. So this actually is a bad thing as well. And this is something Skip pushed me to put in here. This doesn't directly apply to the appliances themselves, but sometimes they're managed through a client application. So the admin will install it on a Windows box. And one example, I was talking to one of their engineers this morning actually, and I brought this up, and it didn't seem to click. The vendor, by default, it installs to the temp directory, but with bad permissions. So it allows any user on the machine to overwrite it, and the service itself actually installs with bad permission. So any user can stop it, overwrite it, and start it again, and then have system privileges. So that's definitely a big vulnerability that that product brings. So now some defensive ideas, because I can't come up with a simple solution. Don't immediately trust the vendor, especially if it's a small vendor, and especially if it claims to stop unknown attacks with 100% accuracy. Prove them wrong. Ask for a demo. Look at the product yourself. Look at the track record. Go out to ExploitDB. See what their developers, what mistakes they've made in the past. So you can look at a specific company and see that they have a lot of, say, XSS vulnerabilities. Look for XSS vulnerabilities in whatever product they're pitching to you. And if they have nothing disclosed, that's not a good sign. It might not be a bad sign either, but you should definitely not take that as they're good to go. Because most of the vendors, most of the appliances that I looked at did not have vulnerabilities publicly disclosed. You can ask to see previous security tests so you know where to start, but I wouldn't trust them. And use a systematic approach, like do a standard pen test. Honestly, it's good practice just to download the VMs and just take a look at it. And then most of the vulnerabilities that I've disclosed in this process were OWASP top 10 type stuff. So if you just look at that, you're probably going down a good track. And as soon as you find one, tell the vendor and have them fix it. Yeah. And also think about how you're going to sanitize. So ask them, are you going to steel trap this appliance when you send it to me? How am I going to pull my data off? Ask them if they have any way to easily do that. Because it might devalue the product if you have to pull the hard drive out. So you'll see appliances on eBay that are used and selling for a couple $1,000s, but they have the hard drives in because the company took the time to be able to sanitize. And then segment them from your network so they can't be used against you. Train your team in web pen testing techniques, these vulnerabilities, passwords, how to look on the network for these vulnerabilities. And absolutely demand control. If they're not going to give you the root password, you have no idea what that password is, or how they're controlling it, or how they're using it, because you can't even review the logs on the appliance itself. So if you're sticking it on the internet, how do you know that your Google search appliance, that Google is not SSHing into it on the inside of your network? You don't. So if they don't fix this stuff, don't buy their products. And that's an easy way for all the vendors to get better. So here's the support request that I sent in to one vendor asking, hey, can I please have the root password? And they said, unfortunately, we cannot disclose these credentials due to our policy to protect our product. So they could care less about my data. They want to protect their product. But that really didn't matter, and for multiple reasons. I already had root before I sent them that email. All right, so thanks to all the people that allowed me to give this presentation. Thanks, Meredith, for letting Skip mentor me. And you can join Skip and I at Black Hat tomorrow, giving a talk on Pass the Hash. Are there any questions?
Did you ever reformat it with the stock firmware from the appliance manufacturer?
In one case, I did. And actually, in that case, I found the vulnerabilities thanks to the firmware, because it's a lot easier to look at the firmware itself and find vulnerabilities than the appliance. But in that case, I had to socially engineer them into thinking I had a service agreement, because a lot of companies hide behind a service agreement. You can't get updates. You can't get access to downloads. So using a previous position that I had, I used that email address, and I was able to get that firmware, but only in that one instance. Yep.
What responses have you gotten from vendors generally from
A lot of them, for the most part, over 50% have responded that it's a feature, that it's not even a vulnerability, because you had to log in. So they blame us for setting a bad password, even though you can't set a sufficiently secure password on the appliance itself. So then I come back and ask them to change their password policies to allow that. And a lot of times they come back and say the reason that they don't allow more secure passwords is because that introduces a security vulnerability. But we know what they're talking about. They don't want to filter input, so they don't know how to figure out what to do with a tick or a semicolon. So they just say, no, you can't use any special characters. But some of them were very difficult, and those that were difficult, I just went through the US cert. And hopefully those advisories will come out at some point in the next few weeks, because it seems like a lot of them are not going to patch the products because they kind of treat them as end of life immediately after they release. So they built the appliance, they release it, they're not going to do any updates. It is what it is, you have it. So in that case, they can just say it's end of life. And so dealing with the US cert is fun because they will just say, okay, it's end of life, it's open, it's out there. And then at that point, I'll do some blog posts on obscuresec.com. And follow me on Twitter. I have like 8 followers. Any other questions? Like as in stores that have appliances sitting out there? Yeah, that's probably an interesting attack vector. If you could just go into Best Buy and they're selling some type of home appliance in the back and you can backdoor it or buy it and return it and just wait for someone else to actually buy it. I'm sure they don't restore those back to default. That is an interesting attack. Hopefully you're dealing directly with the vendor though on an enterprise appliance, but that would definitely affect your home. Say if you bought a router and someone backdoored it. Yeah, every industry has their own appliances that are unique to their industry. So that's why you've got to go out and look what's in your environment. These are just what I see typically, the types of appliances that I see. There are probably thousands of them out there. All right, thank you guys. Triple.